Since childhood, I've heard the words peace to the world. World, we are for peace. We are peaceful people. But then it always turned out that an armored train was puffing somewhere nearby. For the first time, I saw a leader of the country who, without saying these beautiful words, actually does what the Bolsheviks used to talk about. He is building peace on the planet. Why did he get involved in the conflict between the Congo and Rwanda? Yes, Thailand against Cambodia, well, that's not his business at all, right? Armenia against Azerbaijan, what does that have to do with him? India, Pakistan, Egypt, Ethiopia, those are not his business at all, right? Serbia, Kosovo, too. And the last one that's burning is Israel, Hamas, well, Iran, of course, and Russia, Ukraine. Trump's voters want him to bring his efforts back home and focus on their problems. The country no longer wants to spend money and effort on establishing peace, especially in countries where America is hated. Well, whatever we do, but what for? I think they're jealous. They're extremely jealous and can't do anything about it. Why does Trump need this? By the way, that's an interesting question. How? I think that as a rational person, Trump understands that war doesn't solve anything. What? And that it only leads to the destruction of what we all actually strive for: security, prosperity, and the opportunity to pursue happiness. Well, without taking away property, yes, freedom, so to speak, and the right to pursue the happiness of others. War prevents us from creating new and better things, things that bring people benefits, objects, situations, anything at all. That's what war is. That, I would say, is the opposite of Trump's nature. Continuation. Russia and Ukraine is one of the most unresolved conflicts, and knowing something that we probably don't know, Trump keeps trying to stop the enemies who actually want to keep fighting, despite all the losses, deaths, and suffering of their people. Currently, I don't know, it's the 164th, 939th, or 867th time Kushner and Vitkov flew to Moscow.
Are also watching Moscow, where right now President Vladimir Putin is meeting with the United States Special Envoy Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner, the president's son-in-law. Negotiations have lasted over 3 hours, discussing a possible path to peace in Ukraine. We turn it over to Matthew Chance from Cable News Network. He is live from Moscow. Matthew, are there any signs from the Kremlin about how they think these negotiations are going?
Well, not yet, unfortunately. We're in a kind of information vacuum right now. We're still waiting. I just wrote to the Kremlin's press secretary, Dmitry Peskov, to find out if the negotiations are nearing an end, if he can describe the mood in the room or something like that. But there was no response. He said earlier that these negotiations would not be limited in time. They've been going on for about 3¼ hours now. They're quite deep and intense. I was also told earlier in the Kremlin that afterwards there will be a briefing from one of the Russian officials who are in the room at the table. Yuri Ushakov, the president's aide for foreign affairs, is sitting, if you've seen those photos of the table, he's sitting to the right of Vladimir Putin. The main task for President Trump's special envoy, Steve Witkoff, and for the president's son-in-law, Witkoff, is also participating in these meetings. It will be to assess how ready the Kremlin is for compromises and solutions that have been developed between American and Ukrainian officials over the past week in Geneva, as well as recently over the weekend in Florida, where they tried to find creative solutions to bypass Ukraine's main red lines, such as its desire to join, as well as Russia's demand that Ukraine give up territory that it has annexed but not yet conquered. These are huge problems with the peace plan supported by the United States EM. Solutions are being discussed, but none have been agreed on yet. And now Witkoff and Kushner are presenting these solutions to the Kremlin to find out if Vladimir Putin has any interest in the deal. The floor is yours. All right.
Matthew Chance, live from Moscow. Thank you. And now to Nick Payton-Walsh from Cable News Network. He's in Kyiv. Nick, what is Ukraine's perspective on these talks?
In short, there is great concern about what exactly Steve Witkoff presented to the Kremlin during these extensive talks. Obviously, this is the result of hours, if not days, when he really, I think for the first time, had detailed communication with the Ukrainian negotiating team in Florida. Over the weekend, there was even a second meeting early Monday morning between Witkoff and the main Ukrainian negotiator. Then this plan on the way to Moscow. Witkoff talks on the phone with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, Emmanuel Macron from France, and Keir Starmer from the United Kingdom, also informing European allies. And Zelensky's tone, I think, was interesting. He tried to emphasize 2 points here: the need for dignity in any specific proposal that is put forward. There's a suggestion that although they are very interested in trying to cooperate, they're not entirely sure how exactly this will be formulated, and they're positioning it, I think, as an American proposal here. Although, without a doubt, they are fully informed and may not agree with what Witkoff is presenting. And at the same time, they're emphasizing to the Ukrainians the need for security guarantees, so that if Ukraine makes painful concessions, there will be security guarantees from the United States and Europe. Which means that a third or fourth invasion, however you count them, is something they won't have to face in the coming months. That was a passionate excerpt from Zelensky's speech today in Ireland, where he is reportedly on standby in case he needs to urgently fly to the United States for a meeting with Trump. It's a short flight from there. Meanwhile, Zelensky talks less about red lines or giving up territories. He really did say that he saw his negotiators spend 6.5 hours discussing where potential front lines could be drawn if there was some kind of deal. So it seems that territory here might be on the agenda. It's notable that after a week of leaks about 28 points, 19 points, and various plans, we still know little about the specifics of Witkoff's presentation. I think this is done so that the Kremlin doesn't learn about the plan from the media first, and maybe so that Zelensky doesn't publicly appear to have agreed to a concession that Putin might later reject. But ultimately, Ukrainians here see Russia advancing on the front, probably with some degree of accuracy, claiming control over the strategic hub of Pokrovsk on the eastern front. And also being aware of the cold here, the harsh winter ahead, and the damage from nightly shelling, and ultimately Zelensky's political weakness due to the corruption scandal.
Zelensky's biggest problem. These are not guarantees of the country's security, but guarantees of security for him and his accomplices. Let's put it this way, yes. Vladimir wants to include a clause about not prosecuting the leadership of Ukraine for any actions during the war. Well, the war with Russia is meant, yes. But the clause that Ukraine proposed was raised by the people, the same people of Ukraine, as an American attempt not to punish Russians for war crimes, and society rose up in protest. In reality, Ukrainian corrupt officials in power want to legalize their stolen millions or even billions. They want to get an indulgence for all the crimes they've committed since 2022, or maybe even since 2014. Just like Biden did, how many? We have about 8,000 people he gave such indulgences. Of course, Russia sees the scandals happening in Ukraine and how European enthusiasm is fading. And most importantly, the Kremlin understands well that Ukraine will most likely lose financial support from the United States. Well, I don't know, let's not name a date, but obviously it's going to happen very soon.
We will continue to follow this story. To provide more insight, I welcome former United States Ambassador to Ukraine, William Taylor, joining us live from Kyiv. Glad to see you, Mr. Ambassador.
Thank you, Linda. Glad to be here.
So, as we speak, Vladimir Putin is meeting with representatives from the United States envoy Steve Witkoff and, of course, Jared Kushner, the president's son-in-law, after previously accusing Europe of blocking United States peace efforts. What did the original United States peace agreement look like before feedback from Europe and Ukraine, and how much has it changed since then?
Linda, we don't know exactly how much has changed. We know about the first deal, called the 28-point plan, which apparently was developed by the Russians and handed over to Steve Witkoff, who made some changes. And the Russians leaked the 28-point plan, and you and we and all of us read every point of that plan. And people were quite surprised at how pro-Russian it was until they found out that it was developed by the Russians. The Russians included in this plan what they wanted, and they were very pleased with it. And President Putin definitely approved this plan since his people developed it. But the Europeans and Ukrainians didn't. And Marco Rubio gathered the Europeans and Ukrainians and proposed another plan of 19 or 20 points, which the Ukrainians liked much more.
The problem is that the plan proposed by Europe and Ukraine won't even be discussed by Russia. It's still unclear how these two plans, the Ukrainian European and the American Russian, can be combined in a way that both sides would agree to. By the way, there's a legend in Ukraine that it was simply written in Russian and then artificial intelligence, that is, artificial intelligence, translated it. In general, it's complete and utter nonsense. They're trying to compromise us in this way, like the Americans together with the Russians are against us, and so on. And I don't know how it's possible to reconcile these two different plans. But again, it's possible that Kushner, Rubio, Vitkov, Trump know something that we don't, and that's why they keep pushing both sides toward an agreement. It seems impossible to us, but sometimes the impossible happens. In Ukraine, finally, even the ruling class is having a hard time. Before that, everything was actually pretty good for them. Money in offshore accounts, kids in London, Paris, the United States, mistresses nearby, saunas running and cash flowing like a river. But lately, things have gotten a bit heated. So for now, it's just a bit heated. November 29, the 6th. Just recently, a member of the United States House of Representatives, that's Pat Harrigan, stated that more than $360 billion, I don't know how he calculated it, dollars have gone to Ukraine from countries supporting the Ukrainian people's fight against the invaders. So, well, he made everything clear. The whole world started to help. From his view, he calculated that funds were sent for the noble cause of supporting Ukraine's fight against the invaders, and they sent about that amount. Over $360 billion, including money, equipment, services, and more. Since 1922, a total of more than $306 billion United States dollars in weapons, aid, and money have come into Ukraine. What is meant is that this military aid has been partially stolen. Possibly by the very people who gave this money. Let's put it that way, meaning our own people, yes. Possibly together with those who were responsible for receiving this money, transferring the money, weapons, and resources. God knows what schemes they were planning over there. In Ukraine itself, in 1924, 1925, let's say, mind-blowing corruption schemes were uncovered. Energy, government procurement. Well, according to preliminary data, of course, bandits from the Zelensky and Rumak groups were involved in all these schemes. The scale of the hidden dealings is currently estimated in the hundreds of millions, not hundreds of billions. But Pett didn't say that everything was stolen. He said a significant part. These so far have stolen hundreds of millions. Ministers, former partners, so to speak, of Zelensky, and even apparently the heads of the Ukrainian president's administration, and also, it seems, his longtime partner, Timur Mindich. So there are ministers like Svetlana Grinchuk, German Galushchenko, former Deputy Prime Minister Alexei Chernyshov, current member of the National Defense Council Rustem Umerov. Probably, yes. And of course, the biggest blow was the search by the America-controlled Anti-Corruption Committee. Ukrainians still couldn't bring National Anti-Corruption Bureau of Ukraine under their own control. So a search was conducted at Yermak's house, and after that Yermak resigned. Some say he left on his own, others say he was fired or advised to leave. So damn, what's going on there? On one hand, National Anti-Corruption Bureau of Ukraine means America. These aren't our own people, the kind you can just buy off or threaten. But some nameless Americans in the CIA and the White House, good luck getting to them. There is no direct legal evidence that Zelensky or his family personally appropriated significant amounts of money. No villas, no resorts, no bank accounts. Well, I mean, in their names. Maybe, by the way, there is something. Maybe it has already been found, but so far we haven't been told anything about it. A number of offshore accounts have been discovered that were set up in the name of Zelensky's wife, but they were established long before the elections. And in fact, many Russians and Ukrainians avoid their own local taxes this way. So, well, this isn't even a hint of a crime. Does Zelensky have a share? To say that Zelensky doesn't have a share in the loot, well, he kind of does. Do you remember Dmitry Simonov, how that same younger Biden wrote? What does big guy mean? So I'll take a share for the big guy, for the big man, 10% for myself, and then I'll personally hand it over to him. And if Zelensky doesn't have a share, then he's a man who let his buddies steal while he just sat there like a wooden Buddha, but with a stone face. And if Zelensky is a part of this common fund, or maybe even its leader, then that means they're all literally capos. And Vladimir will have to be caught for something completely different. Just like how the capos were caught and jailed for tax evasion, not for murder and robbery. By that time, it was almost impossible to link him to murders and robberies. But let's get back to our own business, so to speak. I'd like to explain to everyone who keeps writing and saying, like, we accuse people but never put anyone in jail. You need to understand one, well, basically simple, it seems to me, truth about legality. If in tyrannical, dictatorial regimes, everything is simple, so to speak. Everything, if the dictator wants, call him whatever you like. Yes, they can imprison, rob, you can imprison, destroy. Well, maybe they can formally hold some kind of trial over the enemies, as they usually call them, enemies of the people, but in reality they're enemies of the dictator. But if the state is governed by the rule of law, thank God things get more complicated. For example, we know what it means to be a member of Congress like Ilhan Omar. I mentioned her yesterday. She married a man whose name and other details match those of her biological brother. This man obtained citizenship as the husband of a citizen, and then they divorced, and he disappeared. And Ilkan claims that he has no idea where he is. At the same time, Ilkan listed in the declaration the tax office together with, let's say she submitted it, but she listed her boyfriend as her husband, and as a married couple, they filed taxes. So either she lied about the marriage, or she lied about the taxes, or she lied about both. And it's kind of obvious to everyone that she was cheating. It's just obvious. But there's a certain distance between that and proving it in court. From the court's point of view, supposedly the husband should be tested for DNA and, so to speak, and the brother should be tested as well, that is. How can you test him if the husband disappeared? You need witnesses to prove the husband and brother are the same person, or other witnesses. So it's not just suspicions anymore, but actual evidence. And about filing with the tax office, Ilkan has already said that she made a mistake. She didn't understand anything about it. She signed by mistake and paid either $500 or $5,000 as a fine for this matter. A court in a state of law needs not suspicion, but evidence. And the one who files a lawsuit must present this very evidence, because our country is based on the presumption of innocence. That means you are innocent until proven otherwise, and not the other way around. Like in typical terrorist or dictatorial regimes, you're guilty, well, just because I want to eat. That's why the investigation takes a long time, meaning it's thorough, meticulous, and done in such a way that the evidence can't be challenged in court. So before you write nonsense like, no one will be punished anyway, ask yourself, Do you want things done carelessly, but with the risk that the suspect will get away, will leave, or slowly taking longer but including all the facts? Personally, I don't care if it takes a long time and goes slowly. The main thing is that the suspect doesn't get away. By the way, did you notice how many problems the judges caused during the trial of Comey, Letitia, and James? That supposedly the prosecutors were appointed incorrectly, and because of that, they're all prosecutors. So what was brought to court is canceled. The case has now gone to the Court of Appeals, and there they also said there were only Democrats sitting there. They also said that things are going to get really bad, that this case will even go to the Supreme Court. Well, naturally, that means it's being delayed. In other words, exactly what the prosecutor didn't want, since he wanted things to move faster. And the defense, of course, is trying to drag things out as much as possible. As they say, either the donkey dies or the emperor gets reelected. When the prosecutor was appointed, he didn't sign some paper or he wasn't given some certificate. Because of this, the criminal might be released without punishment. So not to show. This is a tip from me to you. Don't show your lack of knowledge about American processes when you write comments on my videos. Well, before you write, yes, if you're sure about something, well, check it. I can't keep answering the same thing over and over again. Here are two things. Yes, there's the Budapest Memorandum, and you are obligated under it. But have you read it? Silence. Read it. Silence. And then it goes away forever after you read it. And then the next thing is, have you read it? What about the Budapest Memorandum? Well, things like that. And this is the second thing, so they keep talking about it all the time, and no one has been executed, expelled, or imprisoned there yet. Yes, gentlemen, no one has been jailed, executed, or expelled yet. Because here we have what's called due process, meaning there has to be some kind of process before anything like that can begin. And there are stages, and there are steps that must be followed. It's slow, it's frustrating, yes.
The November 2020 election is going to depend on whether it's fair or not and on the state of the economy. The left knows that. They know two things. First, that there's huge forecasted growth in oil and natural gas production. Secondly, deregulation and tax reduction are provided by this great, wonderful bill, which will fully come into force in 2026. About $10 trillion of foreign investments, even if it's only half of what's promised, but it's a huge amount, 7 or 8 times more than Biden got in his last year in office. If you put it all together, the economy that's flourishing now on Black Friday after Thanksgiving got almost $11 billion in online sales. It was a record. Not just better than last year at this time under Biden, but better than the economy is already strong, and you can imagine that these catalysts and these incentives that are coming, deregulation, tax reduction, large-scale foreign investments, the deportation of 2 million people from the United States every year, who were probably on Social Security and were involved in many cases of crime. You know what will happen? The economy will boom in 2026, and the left is aware. So what is their plan?
The left knows perfectly well what exactly leads to the well-being of the people. But if they know why, then they do the opposite. A very simple reason. Gentlemen, it's easier to rule if we depend on the ruler. Marx wrote that as long as the bourgeoisie has money, they won't be able to. Therefore, it is necessary to suck money with taxes and other ways, because otherwise they are not dependent, and it is difficult to rule them. How can you persuade them to switch to communism? And when they become dependent, they will be like little ones screaming hooray and kissing. So what can you offer them? At least for those who can provide or withhold money and goods. Do the Democrats try to keep the Prince of Darkness named Donald J. Trump?
Demonize Doge, pursue immigration and customs enforcement, set up a street theater. disorder, call them the Gestapo, say that they are worse than Hitler, go against the National Guard, which has cleaned up Washington, call for mass resistance, call it illegal, close the government, close it for 40 days, longer than ever in history, close it without any purpose. It didn't give anything. It supposedly didn't give anything. It brought it down big. Senators from the Democratic Party and the representatives made a video. Let them tell the American soldiers, all the 3 million active military personnel, you don't have to obey the order if, according to your legal wisdom, your extensive jurisprudence knowledge, if you are an ordinary person. And he says, go through that hill. I don't have to do it. It's illegal. Create unrest. And the nail of the Epstein files, you had Epstein files. Know that Donald Trump excluded him from his circle of friends even before he was accused of anything. But there are about 80 or 90% of people in the so-called Epstein files. These are emails, text messages, court records, maybe Internal Revenue Service files, but 80 to 90% are Democrats. That's why it wasn't publicized during the Democratic administration. It doesn't matter, Epstein files, Epstein files, Epstein files, it's the Epstein case. And now Donald Trump finally says, okay, they're published. And what do we hear? Silence? Maybe a little bit about Larry Summers, about democracy, but silence. Why don't leftists want every name to be published again? Because they have more Democratic donors than Trump has Republican donors who talk about it. So these Epstein files, like the lockdown, like the streets, like all these videos, like all this dirty vocabulary, they were created just for one thing, one reason, one goal, to distract you from the economy. What kind?
Victor David Hanson is exactly understandable. Even a small child is an understandable person. That's what clarity of thought means. It comes down to clarity of expression, or rather, it comes down to clarity of expression. What they do is distract voters from Trump's successes, especially in improving the lives of citizens of the United States. Natural gas went down by 10% tickets, by 10% eggs by 40%, farming products, vegetables, and fruits by 7%. They haven't become cheaper yet. Meat, poultry, fish, bread, milk, coffee. What else? Sweets, right? But according to the estimates of the World Bank, which is an organization under the United Nations in the United States, there is a massive drop in prices in the third and fourth quarters of 2026 for energy and agriculture. That is not the end products, but what they are made of. And then there will be goods too. Oil, gasoline, kerosene, and diesel will drop by 12% if nothing happens, like some kind of international conflict with a war, with burning of wells, right? Grain, oil, and other so-called food and raw materials by 5 to 6%, cars, household appliances, electronics. But by the summer of 2026, that is, by the time of forming an opinion about the November elections, noticeable changes are not expected, and therefore Trump's team will try to do something that will cheer people up. Well, first of all, Trump is going to send 7 checks to 2,000 adults, and if I'm not mistaken, 600 to children. Picture a family of 4, 2 adults and 2 kids. That totals 5,200 for the family. A gift. This is a very good gift. Actually, it's not even a gift. That's what it says. Compensation for your expenses and for your duties. Trump will reduce the duties. I think either right now or before Christmas, or immediately after Christmas. For 200 types of goods to lower prices, Trump will provide the opportunity to take them away. This is called the quantity because of certain reactions. The fact is that there are federal taxes on gasoline, so to speak. Taxes, let's say federal ones, on gasoline, yes. He can also call on the so-called red states to lower or temporarily suspend the sales tax. Plus, no one can predict what President Trump will do, because to predict what Trump will do You need to have his imagination and his talent. And now, gentlemen, subscribe, ring the bell, and we'll be waiting for the next video messages. Goodbye.